Thank you, India Art Fair, for bringing so many of us together, so many of you together, to be able to talk about what the future looks like. The theme for today's panel is called The Present and the Future of Curation. Obviously, that's a huge framework. But I suppose what we'll try and do today is, through the wonderful windows of our panelists, look at some semblance of what the future of curation looks like. But as a person who comes from a museum of art and archaeology, I have a bad habit of looking back. So I'm really going to start off by inviting all of you to share a little bit about where your childhood was spent, the cities that you grew up in, and in retrospect, if something of that has come into your work. Prabhakar, could we begin with you, and then we can move on.
Thank you. Thank you, Art Fair. Thank you, Shalin, and thank you all of the team who invited me for this wonderful session. And also, I'm glad that this session has not started with the question about the, how Ambedkar, when Ambedkar entered in your life, or how Ambedkar came in your life. So I'm glad that this, because I have experienced so many sessions that people from the voices has been represented, always asked by such questions, and I completely disagree that the people who endorse such voices are not belongs to the Ambedkar only, because as we are Indian human beings, the Ambedkar is in everybody's life when they get born in this country, because the democracy, the constitution, and we are part of this country. So thanks for this beginning. I think I came from the city called Ichalganji, and I have 2-3 locations, places, cities and villages that I born and brought up. So I'm a son of a powerloom laborer. The Ichalganji is the city based in Maharashtra, which is in district of Kolhapur, as known the city of Manchester because of the huge production of Manchester cloth, which is also called as the Manjar part, which is also part of my material. Like my father used to provide me all the surfaces that he created as a cloth, and I used to paint on that cloth. So there's also connection, because also I when I was a child, I used to wear clothes, shirts and pants from that cloth, the raw Manchester. So that's the story. And the connection today we see in my practice, the ideological connection comes from my parents. Like my parents also part of the very important social justice movement, which is Ambedkarite movement. So my upbringing in such circumstances was really helpful me to think about what we are doing today. Yeah, and I studied my basic art education, like art teacher diploma in Ichalganji. Then I shifted to Bombay to pursue further education in painting, drawing and painting. After completion my education, I started practicing as an artist. But the moment I came to know that there are a number of people, as we call the majority of this country, and the work they are producing are still not represented in the art scene, nationally and internationally. So that is how I started writing about art, to bridging them to the cities, to what we call as a mainstream, which is also majority of people excluded from the mainstream, which is again the question itself. So I started looking at it as initially it was not a curation, it was just writing about them. It was just bridging them to the cities, as I came from very rural background. I'm the first person who studied, who get education from the family. So I can feel the gap between the rural connect to the urban. So I started bridging the people who comes from rural background, writing for them, writing their shows and catalog. And people started calling it as a curation. So I started appreciating that as well. And one more reason is that the caste question within the society, nobody was discussing the caste question, and it's a daily, lived experiences. The people are killing every day. The people are raped every day under the name of caste and religion. And, the people got killed. The number of people got killed in the wars, and the number of people got killed under the name of name of caste and religion are more bigger. So, but still, the very sensitive people that we call as an artist and curators are keep quiet, do not talk about the people got killed by people got enslaved by our own people, but and also talking about colonial discourse. But we, as an Indian, colonized before Britishers by our own people, and we still keep quiet on that, and still we are colonized by the system, the man-made system. And nobody is willing to intervene, the ethical intervention in such systems. So that is how I maybe stretched a lot.
No, but thank you for sharing that, how you've come to be where you are. Gina?
Hi, thank you for coming to listen this conversation between us, which is a kind of a blind date, right? I would say that maybe there are three aspects that could take the audience into my childhood, kind of, and those three aspects are also reflected in my curatorial practice nowadays. One of them is that I come from an insular context, and it's a particular one because relatively speaking is quite small, but then it has three mountain ranges that are between, the altitudes are between 1,200 meters until 3,200 meters above the sea level. And that gives, like a certain continental understanding of the territory. And that also means that I've been always surrounded by mountains. So it's weird that my main research is precisely entitled The History of the Mountains. But also that space is really located in the middle of the American continent. And that, for good and for bad, is a really geopolitical space that it's been disputed since, way before the colonization of the continent. And in that sense, I think in my curatorial practice, there is always a really strong notion of consciousness of the place and the context in which I am working. The second one is that, as I came from a rural context, and, you always had to go to the city to get education and many other things. And so in that sense, the journey and being in movement is being always something, since childhood. And maybe because of that, in my curatorial practice, I used to say that I think through the journey. Not because of the action per se, but actually for some components of being in a journey, which is, for me, the conscious of the ephemeral, the errancy, trafficking of knowledge, and making links, not only between humans, but also between other forms of life. And the third one is that in that island, which is shared between two nation states, post-colonial states, one of them, which is Haiti, which was, the first Black Republican to become as that in the 19th century, and then the Dominican Republic, which is a nation state, which at some point the leaders were trying to create a confederation to try to push for the independence of the Caribbean, both insular and continental. And so, I think also being in such intensity of what means being part of two nation states with steroids, let's say. It's been also something that is present in my practice on thinking on how the subjectivity is being built so far through the modern lens nowadays. So yeah, I will leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you. Tarini?
Thank you so much for inviting me here. It's really nice to be part of a panel of people that I also hadn't met until a few minutes ago. So it really feels like a really interesting meeting of minds, so thank you. I was born here in Delhi, but at a very young age, because of my father's job, went to Southern Africa, so grew up in Zambia, and then later in South Africa, but did my schooling in London. And then ended up building a professional career there. So for me, I was kind of neither part of an Indian African diaspora, nor was I part of a British Indian diaspora, and nor was I based in India. So I think that level of kind of confusion and the unsolvable is something which I think has really guided me in my own professional experiences and in my curatorial practice. For me, the idea of diaspora, notions of home and belonging, how one connects across the sphere of art making or thinking around wider cultural practices is very much informed by that sense of confusion and that sense of trying to find moments of solidarity or community within discourse. Diaspora for me is something which is constantly in flux, it's constantly changing, it's undefinable. And throughout my journey in the arts, whether it's, I started in a really traditional art historical space where I was the only non-white person on my studying art history. And I came to art history because of a love of literature, a love of history, a love of music, but also a sense of feeling a bit like an outsider in museum spaces and being really pushed by that anger. I think that's kind of a emotion which really drives me, and I think is often, especially as a woman in the arts, is made to be a taboo. You're not allowed to be angry, but I think it's a very useful emotion. And wanting to bridge things for myself, wanting to find linguistic structures that help me better understand myself and my experiences. Starting in that very traditional art historical space, doing an art history MA in Scotland and then in France, and having little to no exposure to contemporary art, I kind of just ended up being in the right place at the right time. One of the wonderful things about the art world, and can be one of the wonderful things about the art world, is finding your people. And I've been really, really lucky to be mentored by people that have pushed me in the right directions, and those have often been other women of color particularly. And so, I was pushed into curating, into thinking outside of a purely Western art historical lens, in thinking outside of the commercial gallery context, and that's how I ended up working in institutions. But I would say, that my practice is very much informed by my childhood, and it still is.
Thank you, Zasha.
Thank you. Hello. Thanks to all the organizers. I know you've done a lot to bring us all here. It's exciting to be here. And I'm very excited about my panelists. This is a very radical question I've ever been asked on a panel, to talk about one's biography and give coordinates. And I like the confusion it's brought in me, because this is what curators usually ask of artists, right? To send your biography 50 spaces. And I realize the violence of that. And of course, my biography is interesting to me, but to no one else, because my shows are not biographical. In fact, they've always tried to exactly step out of having to relate everything to yourself. And I guess, I think what I remember from the artist's perspective is I've had very interesting conversations about biographies. One is from a Bosnian Yugoslavian artist. We don't really know because she refuses to write down where she was born. And for her, it's a political gesture. And when she mentioned that, I said, fine, don't write it. And she said, that's great, because I'm always forced to write something. So it's great you said, don't write it. And then I had another artist who was born in a refugee camp, moved around a lot. He's actually Sawang Wongse Yongwe. He's spoken at this forum some years ago. And the other artist was Milica Tomic. And Sawan said the opposite. He said, but I've been in so many countries. I've lived so long. So I said, then write all of them. So I'm somewhere between this idea of biography, whether one gives nothing or gives, confuses everybody. I do think, though, our lived experiences do shape the kind of politics we have. And so I think Clark House stayed together so long for one reason only, and that is because without even saying it or knowing it, each of us had some kind of political feeling that kept us like a glue together, because there was nothing else to keep us together. There was no money. There was lots of friendship, but also lots of Punch and Judy, yeah, and we had a lot of fun. But I think it was some kind of each one coming from a very different feeling that some injustice had been witnessed, and that's what kept us together. But they were each very different, and we didn't actually spend a lot of time talking about that. But it was unsaid. What else do I want to say about biographies? I wanted to say maybe just to address the opening remarks made by Shaheen on the majority. This is majority and minority are words that in my present work, but also for a long time, I've been critical of imagining that the word majority exists, and I think it's important also for what's happening in the elections, etc. Is there such a I don't care about the minorities, but is there such a thing as a majority? I mean, we know that probably there isn't a thing as minority, but is there even such a thing as a majority? That is my main question to all of us. A homogeneous majority. What would that look like? And which one of us would want to belong to it? I can't think of any one of us who want to be part of that, and who really genuinely belong to that. It's a nice catchphrase to feel kind of political solidarity, but it's very constructed, very fictionalized, and is certainly not homogeneous and leads to a lot of the political battles. So I don't interrogate minorities as much as interrogate who is the majority, I think I'm the majority, but, in which way? So that is something I wanted to do also with, my present curating, where I think, or with my present teaching, because you have people who feel very afraid of speaking about something they think they don't know about, because they apparently belong to another country, another nation, another minority, or not, so they will not speak about something else that they don't know about. And I think the curatorial position is exactly that, to give yourself a passport, to start to speak about things that you don't know about, because actually this identity that one thinks one belongs to, my feeling is that we don't actually know our own group labels as thoroughly as we think we do. And there are many blind spots. And so I think curating is really about giving yourself the luxury to fail in understanding someone else, but to try. Yeah, that is what I want to say about biography.
Thank you. No, that's you put it very well. And I'm currently in the middle of curating an exhibition on the ancient world, and this is exactly what we encounter all the time, that it's impossible to create boundaries about people or about cultures. In every part of the ancient world, there was so much intermingling of ideas and people that what we understand today as geographic boundaries are just sort of disappearing. But I'm slightly going to throw it back to you, and maybe we can continue with the other panelists to now talk about so as curators, and all of you are working with projects which one way or the other are bringing out thoughts, experiences of people who are oppressed or are struggling, suffering, fighting. Where did you make the decision of being part of that? Because sometimes it may not have been experiences that you were going through at the time. How did you make that choice of being part of their journeys, and what is your role in articulating these experiences?
You will start this way. I didn't do that, but I do find joy in artists who are supposed to, be talking about pain, but it ends up being very light, joyful, artistic, exciting. So that's what I follow.
You give an example?
Yeah, all of Clark House artists were like this. I think they had a very mature understanding of oppression, which is that they were young, we were all young and floundering, but I think what was incredible was, this guy was doing avant-garde theater in the middle of the unions. They were playing chess in the middle of, a riot. They were writing an art history book, meeting every day, crossing a riot in order to finish that book because they understood that was important. It might not be joy, but it's a kind of sense of purpose that, yes, you can let the oppressions define us, but it's actually the pleasure and the joy and the life that defines us, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Tarini, would you like to share something?
Yeah, I think that I'm not kind of setting out to look for artists who bear a burden of oppression, but rather see my role as a curator, and especially within an institution, but especially within a Western institution, to be responsible for making space for artistic voices which reveal our shared humanity and contribute to a better understanding as to who we are as a wider society. So I think that naturally inclines to support artists, to guide artists, to help artists find space and money and time and resource to produce work which challenges the very bare bones of where I work and the buildings in which I also occupy. And, I think that artists are the reason we all do what we do. And that comes with, as Zasha says, not just kind of a narratives of oppression and brutality and fight and struggle, but also all the different guises and languages that occupies: humor, lightness, joy, solidarity, poetry, all of these different things. And I think, I agree about that complexity between majority and minority and how helpful and unhelpful they can be as terms. But as someone who is an exception within my institution, because I'm the only one who comes from where I come from, I suppose, and maybe that's the best way of thinking about it, I feel an urge and a desire and a motivation and a fire to fight for more of me within that space. So that's kind of my lens to it, as opposed to, seeking out a particular narrative.
Thank you. Gina?
In my case, I really trust in art as a creative force that came from, the vital drive. And in that sense, the vital drive is something that will came out, even it doesn't matter like the conditions in which you are. And in that sense, I've been working with artists that are really following that vital force and putting and making it into something that the material world called art. And for me, the curatorial role is really to talk, to insist, to create, and to nurture spaces as the exhibition space in itself, as this public sphere in which, these debates and this vital force should be appearing. It doesn't matter, I think, from where this is. Like, I think most of the artists which I've been working so far, something that I really like is that they are not responding to something. They are really creating new conditions and new ways to talk about and to look into something, to experience, and to go beyond the domestication of the perceptual system in itself, with all the things that could be, the intricacies that could have.
Well, this is not about the particular movement that last night I got a dream and I should be a curator or something like that. And also it is not about oppression as well, but the oppressors as well, because who created problem, who are away from to solve it, but the oppressors who are suffering are at the forefront to solve it. That's a bit contradiction in particularly in Indian context. That's why Ambedkar always coined, I forget the name. Anyways, also the position is also important for me in the sense of, putting the work that we feel that we should do, that the position is about the anti-caste. The people consider themselves that they are anti-caste. But the point when the movement comes to the annihilation of caste, they practice totally against it. For example, all the people who feel that they are progressive, they may be politically opponent of fascist forces, but in contrast, they are culturally with them, and they are practicing for them. What I experienced in our day-to-day life. So that has to be contested, that has to be questioned. So that position, every Indian, mostly the people I experienced that the contradiction. At the same time, they deny the position of being, the annihilation of caste. They consider themselves that they are part of anti-caste movement, but at the same time, they also practice the caste. And in the art world, I feel that the culture, and today's time, especially in India, the political situation, there is no line between religion and culture, and we think that culture is only about the religion. There is no differentiations, there is no line, there is a line. There is no relation between culture and religion. So that are the position that we are thinking about through the writing of Ambedkar and writing at speeches of Ambedkar. And I also inspired by the Clark House, as always. That is how I get inspiration from the work you did and Sumesh did through the practice of Clark House. And that is the ray of hope for me to start to discuss this idea widely. And that is the courage who brought me And here are in the background some of the projects I did in past, but it will take time to talk about in brief. So this is the last year's art project for India Art Fair I did. The Mayuri Chari's solo booth, also a part of artist and residency program. Again, here we are discussing about the idea of purity, impurity. This work is also part of Berlin Biennale last edition. And the idea of purity, impurity in the context of material and materiality that we come from, we experience and we handle, we practice day-to-day life. The cow dung, the shapes of cow dung, the small sculptures of cow dung on the wall, pasted on the tarpaulin. The importance of material in today's context, the cow dung, the cow as cow as considered is more important than any human being is today. So that is how we are discussing about the materiality and the politics. That's about the position.
Thank you. And thank you all for sharing, I think, what I would think the peek into how your ideologies have developed and how your practice has developed. Would you like to pick out maybe one project or initiative that you'd like to share with our audiences here which reflect this? I'm also trying to make a slight shift from understanding your ideologies to how the practical organizing projects like these in the world. And after that, I hope we can tread to the future to see what you plan in your projects ahead. Tarini, could we begin with you?
Yeah, sure. I thought I would talk a little bit, and forgive me because the only slides I sent over as well, about the British Pavilion in Venice, which was my last project, and was probably the most rewarding and also the most challenging and complicated project I've ever worked on. And I was lucky enough to work with an artist that I think has really shaped my practice, and for many of us working not just only in the West but all around the world, who are kind of motivated by the complexity of geopolitics and thinking about nationhood more broadly, is someone who's really defined and continues to redefine that practice. So I was the curator of the British Pavilion in Venice, which was called Listening All Night to the Rain, working with John Akumfra. The complexity of being asked to represent a nation within a big global biennale, where both artist and curator were born in Britain and were born in ex-colonies, John being born in Ghana and me being born here in Delhi in India, and thinking about what it meant at that time in a period of warfare and conflict and genocide and the threat to the arts and complexities and how one talks about identity and nationhood, brought with it a number of really enormous challenges. You're doing an exhibition in a building, which is this classical, neoclassical 19th century building where every vernacular bears the weight of colonial history to the point that it's overwhelming, truly. And it's also, I don't know if many people know this, but it's also actually the highest point on the island in Venice. So it literally sits like a kind of colonial master next to its colonial counterpoints, France and Canada and Germany, on the top of the hill in the Giardini, and is a really, really complex space also for showing moving image art. And so we approached it in actually quite an emotional kind of guttural way, where we said we wanted to take up as much space as possible, and that was kind of physical, discursive, emotional, sonic, every kind of space we could think of, we did that. And we were talking earlier about what it's like to produce within the Biennale format, and it is honestly life-changingly difficult, very, very complex. The time that you actually have to produce at this scale is really, really pressured and really short. But it was one of the most rewarding of my career. So one of the kind of primary aspects of it was thinking about making interventions into the building and how one can create a journey through the spaces, one can be aware of one's body, how color and texture and sound and imagery can all lend itself to you being an active participant in your own experiences. And so we created essentially various cantos inspired by Ezra Pound, thinking about his journey through history and thinking about our own histories as diasporic people representing Britain at this time and what it meant to bring our community into these spaces, and that community being artists, writers, historians, theorists, poets, other curators that have all make up the very matter of who we are at that time. So each of these spaces within the pavilion in many ways is like an homage to people that have got us to where we've got to, and whether that's Bell Hooks or Langston Hughes or Kabir or, whoever. It's kind of a very, very layered experience. So it was a really, really challenging project. Because the construct of it is centered around a kind of very traditional way of making and producing art. You have so much around you, there's so much pressure. But what was so special about it is that I think it's opened up so much in terms of my own practice. And also, in terms of where I know I want to go. I never really think of exhibitions as being over, even when they're over. They're constantly living in some recess of my mind or just physically in my body. I still hold on to them very much. And this project I know is something that I think I'm going to carry with me in kind of everything that I do. So, I feel very grateful for that opportunity.
Thank you. Zasha, would you like to share? Also, it would be interesting to know from you that in your teaching of curatorial practice, which parts of what you have done in terms of your curatorial projects are you talking about to your students, and how are you presenting it to them?
I don't present my own exhibitions.
Okay.
Yeah. I should probably. That would be more honest. I pretend I'm very important. So, but I guess when an example needs to be given, I do give one from my own experience. This is again a nice question. Which exhibition?
An exhibition or a project that you would like to talk about, which reflects
what I'm doing now.
Yes.
All of them, right? And learn from each one. The one in China, Yinchuan, was particularly a bit of a shift because. But I think the ones that have been most productive are the ones I never got to make. And they all lasted years. The first one that I never got to make was based on some artists that came out of a research travel through the northeastern part of India, not all of it, but just parts of it. And I really was keen to make this exhibition, and I could never get funding for it. That was great, because since I never got funding for it and wrote many applications, I tossed the idea of writing funding applications for the rest of my life, and I no longer wait to make an exhibition. I just make it. And the money comes. And that's what I tell my students as well, to not wait. And what we did in Clark House, this was a very strong discussion between Sumesh Sharma and I, where, he was coming from an economics background, I was coming from whatever art history. But we had this idea that we were not going to wait for someone to give us money or space. And the other one was the one at your institution. I never got to make it. It was called, was supposed to be the opening exhibition of the Jahangir Nicholson Art Foundation. I spent about 3 years preparing it because it was the opening exhibition. So we were preparing the building and preparing the first exhibition. And it was called, The Museum is Where Objects Go to Die. Like a quotation. And yeah, because it was from a collector and one of probably the best collections of contemporary Indian art of a certain period, modern contemporary. And I didn't get to make it at the very end, like a few weeks before it was to open, because I was told it's too international. And it was all Indian artists, but I was told that the ideas were too international. And this was, very hard to understand what was, or to read between the lines. But I think that's something I put back as a question, when we talk about India. I mean, again, in the introduction about India being more assertive on the global scale. I mean, is that what we want? But do we want a voice at a table? Yes, we always did, I imagine, but to speak only about India and our problems and our minorities, no. We want to speak openly, I guess, and so the museum is where objects go to die was something that's remained productive because I learned a lot about art history by making that exhibition. Just because I got to really work with these works close up. We did everything, infrared them, so the preparatory studies, did all kinds of things, understood a lot about materialities. There were so many ways to read this collection, and it was a lot of fun, but I never got to do it.
Well, you've done it in your own way, and hopefully someday it should happen. Gina, also, I mean, I suppose when you share about your project, you've often sort of articulated, and this is all based off what I've read about you, because this is the speed date we're having the first time. But you've talked a lot about the idea of human imagination and human emancipation, and that's been part of your research, rooted in the geography that you work in. So as you perhaps share about a project, please do tell us what that means for you, and is that your grammar of working with contemporary art?
Well, definitely the project that I was thinking about is the Montañas Submarinas, El Fuego Hace Islas, which could be roughly translated from Spanish to English as from underwater mountains, fire makes islands. And that project, I always like it because first, it's really like something that I've been enjoying so much by doing it. And because I've been able to also do it along artists and cultural thinkers that I've been, learning from them, like Sueli Rolnik, which is a psychoanalyst from Brazil, or Denetemto Wambona, which is a philosopher from France, or Jess Fan, which is an artist from Hong Kong living in New York, or Jonas and Juno Van, which are from Fortaleza in Brazil, based in Switzerland. I mean, it's like all over the place. And this project, through the two itinerances, I've been able to, to bring us together. All of us are, we are alive, and we've been able to really talk. And because we are sharing some questions, it's been also not only an exhibition project, but also a way to continue thinking on the doubts that we have, the questions that we have. And also, it allows me to really go into the gallery space as I said in the first intervention, to think really and to take advantage of the degrees of freedom that the gallery space has nowadays, which is pretty questionable in the last year, but really, to use it as that public sphere that it should be. Let's say like that is the vocation of that space, which is, how we can be in contact with other experiences of the bodies of our senses. And that takes me into the research, which is a research that not always appears in my curatorial projects. I think that's also something that I've been trying to, like a fusion from it. Because it's really thinking into emancipation beyond the meanings that maybe humanities granted to that word. And in order to have that, accompany those emancipatory contemporary processes, I think the fusion is a strategy. But when it comes into the art world, this is the kind of things that happen. It was a project that started between Sao Paulo and Santo Domingo, and then extended or created another leg into San Francisco in the US, and then another leg grew up in London, and then another leg in Manila. And yeah, it was like all of them are contexts in which, particularly from the sonic thoughts, aesthetic thoughts, the human beings are pushing into those processes to domesticate the perceptual system, and in a way to also contributing into emancipatory contemporary processes. So yeah, I think that's a summary of it.
Yeah. Well, it's quite difficult to speak about a single project because whatever I have done is always about interconnection between the projects, but specifically I would like to share one project, like a retrospective I curated, and Simon Jaume also wrote for that exhibition a text for the artist Pramod Babu Ramteke at NGMA Mumbai, and this is about the denial of human existence through the art forms, art practices, like the people, how we get educated from the art school, and the people who practice abstraction, and the schooling comes from the Brahminical schools, how they deny the human existence through the art forms is about abstraction, like the art forms comes within, and they completely denies the human existence. They devalue the human existence, and they always promote the idea of divinity. So in the sense of the research of idea of human existence, the humanity is the pivotal part of our practice. So we contest the idea of divinity and so-called spiritual that keeps human underneath of the whole structure, societal structure. So we challenge that idea through his show, and Pramod Babu's abstraction always talk about celebration of open mind, humanity. So it is always about the parallel contribution, institutional contribution towards this discourse. And second project is this is ongoing show at Stir Gallery, which is also part of India Art Fair. The curatorial team is here, the Shamuda, George, and this is show also about, the title of the show is The Panorama Beyond the Color Line, and the title and the concept is based on the writings of W.E.B. Du Bois. A seminal essay, Philadelphia Negro, is about the participation. And it is a kind of rare combination of artists. Like we talk about fraternity, we talk about friendship, but rarely we practice it, So that is how we try to, like the pressure I got from the art world, like as people call me a Dalit curator, which identity I completely deny. The intellectual leadership have to be by own. The other person should not tag you. This is the position I am always talking about, the position of anti-caste and position of annihilation of caste. The identity which shows your caste, which is the thing you are denying, and people are tagging you, identity, that shows your caste. This is the contradiction. And that is how in this show we are trying to practice these things to the materiality, participation. That is how we also called a gallery from Zambia, Everyday Lusaka, and the gallery Sana Jinwala also, she's the artist, is also here. So the participation, also the international solidarity, bridging the gap, inviting like-minded people, and strengthen the voice. That is the major concern. And the rare combination across India, you can see the people from Manipur, people from Guwahati, people from Kochi, people from Pune, Kolhapur, Patna, Bihar, Gujarat. The geographical balance and their lived experiences, their materiality, their own materiality, where they come from, their own stories, the histories, and their lived experiences. So we try to explore this aspect in the show, I think.
Thank you, Prabhakar. I think...
And also one more thing I would like to add, sorry to interrupt. So mainly so there is also a point in the question that the dream in your mind about the project in future also. I mean, I also did a workshop. I also did a project divided in two parts based on the book called Revolution and Counter-Revolution, written by Dr. Ambedkar. The first project was a workshop for 50 artists. We invited them to celebrate Ajanta Caves, its second centenary year of discovery. And we did a show at a public gallery in Mumbai, also including more number in the list. So it was a 60 artists to celebrate Ambedkar's writing and speeches, which is still relevant in today's time in the sense of humanity. So I'm also thinking to make a series of projects to dealing with his writing and speeches. Thank you.
Thank you. Tarini, just a specific question for you. I mean, the Royal Academy has a long legacy of presenting modern and contemporary art. And when you enter as the curator for contemporary art, how do you see yourself sort of organizing projects in an institution with such a long legacy, baggage, whatever you call it?
Well, the RA is quite a peculiar organization. I think it's probably the best way to introduce it, in that it has a long history of housing contemporary artists, but it doesn't have a long history of showing contemporary art shows. So it started in 1768 as essentially an academy and art school, with Joshua Reynolds as the first president. And the history of the academy, beyond just essentially an art school, but also a kind of membership for living artists, architects, and other practitioners in terms of its exhibition program, is within the last 100 years. But a contemporary program of working with artists in the midst of a practice, an engaging practice, one that's constantly evolving, is actually really arguably only the last 15 years. So it's a strange institution in that way, in that I'm the first curator dedicated to contemporary art practice within an art school and within an academy of living artists who are part of its governance. So in many ways, it's definitely a different choice for someone like me who's worked, primarily in contemporary art institutions, but working in contemporary art studios, with collections. It's never also had somebody dedicated to different kinds of internationalisms either. So the exhibition program itself somewhat sits at odds with the rest of the building in a way, but it also presents itself a new challenge, which is why I felt like I wanted to take that step in. I think it's no kind of mystery to anyone that it's a really difficult time for institutions, and I'm sure this has come up a lot in these conversations over the last few days. In the UK, they've very much been under threat for the last 2 decades, and institutions have become a lot more insular. And as somebody who's part of this community and part of many other global communities, that's very challenging because art is something that we need more than ever to help us redefine what these spaces are and who they're for. The RA has never seen itself as a civic space, actually. And that is a really difficult thing to come in as a contemporary curator within, because you want it to be a civic space and you want it to be for more people. So dealing with some of the kind of financial realities of producing art and supporting artists at this time is really hard. But at the same time, I think, the RA is a kind of really unique landscape in which you have artists in governance that you can draw on, but it's also like being in its own sovereign state in a way, and trying to kind of enmesh it slightly deeper within the wider arts ecology is something that I'm really interested in doing. So there are various programs coming up of contemporary artists, but what's interesting about it is that the person I sit next to is an old master specialist, and then the person to my right is someone who's a 19th century specialist. So when I'm here talking about performance art in Cape Town and how that connects with indigenous communities in Brazil, it's like you're speaking a different language, but to me they are too. So it's an interesting environment because I can learn from people whose art worlds are very, very different to ours, and that I really, really appreciate as part of that kind of role as well.
Great, thank you, Zasha. Going on to you. I mean, you're now at the threshold of planning and presenting the Berlin Biennale in 2025. And that is going to be a very open civic space. Could you tell us what you're thinking about it and how some of that, not some of that, all of that would be accessible to the public that's going to walk into it?
Yeah, I don't know. It's Berlin is a very saturated city for politics, art, and culture. But in terms of accessibility, I see there are 2 parts of your question. One is access to art, and that in what I'm noticing in Berlin, but also here yesterday, there was this message that came at 2:00 that the India Art Fair was closed because there were too many people inside. I think we often talk about arts elitism, or it's how difficult it is to get close to, and then on the other hand, the art spaces are always full. They tend to be cheaper than the cost of a cinema. You could go for a biennial for 2 days and it costs the price of 2 hours. It's definitely not dress coded the way a club is. Yeah, I only go to clubs when there are art events, and so I make sure I can get in. It seems like it's a moment where, whether we like it or not, people have decided they want to go to art exhibitions. And that puts a duty on us to stop doing our own little game. But actually people are coming. And what are they coming for? And I think people are coming. I mean, why I go to exhibitions is because for different reasons, but I'm really also looking for something. I am going to biennials looking for ideas. I admit it. I am, because I don't see them. I really think we need some new ideas, and I'm very bored in general by what the politicians are doing, by, in general, our ability that, to even go beyond. So the museums are always 1 step or 10 steps behind what the politicians are doing, as if that is how things have always been. But that makes no sense at all. We have to completely ignore what they're doing and do something else that goes, where they can't go. Because, lawmaking, activism, they have limitations. And we in the arts have fewer limitations. So I go to exhibitions for ideas. Now I know that sounds very gestural and symbolic. And so what I'm not interested in, and I think all of us are no longer interested in, is representational politics in an exhibition. So I don't want to go so that you tell me what is happening in your part of the world. I don't care. Because it's not that I don't care, but I think a lot of teaching is also, being trained that we will do exposure, we will expose this, and this is like great ways to expose what is happening, and it has been therefore an educational turn, and we use exhibitions to understand the world. But at this point, we've also exhausted that, and I think I don't go to exhibitions just to learn, about the world, but I actually go looking for an idea, and I think artists are, I bet on them that they might have some. And curators too. I really enjoy the work of curators. I enjoy what they write. I enjoy it because I think curators are this weird breed that likes to experiment with societies. If I do this, what will happen? And I like that part of curators and artists, some artists. And so when you say intellectually accessible, it's like, no, let's make it intellectually difficult, but actually, who cares? As long as we're saying something, not just exposing, representing, but actually saying, okay, so what is happening in aesthetics today that I can, that would change some ideas or give me some ideas that I put into practice then on a daily basis. So that is, I'm not afraid of being thinky,
Shouldn't be. I think we're sort of running out of time, but really, thank you for sharing this. I also say it from a personal capacity because I'm coming from a very traditional museum institution, and of course, change comes, but it comes much, much more slowly than it does if it's a festival, if it's not art festival or in the contemporary arts. And from that perspective, it's really inspiring to hear all of you because there is, I think sometimes we're all very fearful of bringing change, and to see what you're doing in your worlds is truly inspiring. And there was a question which I don't think I have the time to ask, but I've always wondered how you deal with the idea of fear as even curators and people who are working in the creative spectrum. You don't have to answer that. I mean, we don't have time. But I think for people who are imagining lives and careers in curation, this is quite a real thing that they have to deal with at different levels. So please continue to put out your thoughts on all platforms so that we can keep getting informed and inspired by your work. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.